Imagine standing in the early morning chill of an Italian town, long before sunrise, as a line of anxious men stretches across the forum. No soldiers are present, no chains rattle, yet fear hangs thick in the air. At the center of the square sits a wooden table, behind it a clerk with wax tablets, scales, and an expression hardened by routine. This is not a court of law, it is not a market, it is tax day in Rome, and if you were transported here from the modern world, odds are overwhelming that you would not survive it. To understand why, we must abandon the comforting illusion that taxation in ancient Rome functioned like a modern bureaucratic system. There was no predictable withholding, no appeals process in any meaningful sense, no assumption that the state bore responsibility for your welfare. Roman taxation was not designed to be fair. It was designed to extract, and it did so with a precision and indifference that could ruin families, erase communities, and destabilize entire provinces. The Roman state, whether under the Republic or the Empire, was astonishingly lean by modern standards. There was no massive civil service, no nationwide payroll of salaried tax agents. Instead, Rome relied on a brutal partnership between law, private profit, and coercion. Taxes were not merely obligations, they were instruments of domination. At the heart of the system stood the census. Every 5 years in the Republic, and more regularly under the emperors, Roman citizens were required to declare their property, their income, their family members, and their social status. This declaration determined not only how much tax you owed, but where you stood in Roman society. Understating your wealth was a crime. Overstating it was financial suicide. The margin for error was thin, and the consequences severe. Failure to appear for the census could result in confiscation of property or loss of legal status. In earlier periods, it could even lead to enslavement. This alone would shock a modern taxpayer, but the census was only the beginning. Most taxes were not collected by the state itself. Instead, Rome outsourced the work to private contractors known as publicani. These men did not work for salaries. They bid in advance for the right to collect taxes in a given region. Whatever they could extract beyond that amount was pure profit. The incentive structure was obvious and catastrophic for the taxpayer. A publicanus had every reason to squeeze as hard as possible. He could overassess your property. He could reinterpret vague regulations in his favor. He could demand payment in advance. And if you could not pay, he could seize your land, your livestock, your tools, or your children. The law was on his side. After all, he had already paid Rome. This system was especially devastating in the provinces. In Italy, Roman citizens enjoyed certain legal protections. Outside it, those protections weakened or vanished entirely. Provincial communities were assessed collective tax burdens. If one village failed to meet its quota, the shortfall was distributed among the rest. Your neighbor's poverty became your liability. Under the early empire, emperors like Augustus tried to impose greater regularity. Fixed assessments replaced some arbitrary levies. Provincial censuses became more systematic. But these reforms did not make taxation humane. They made it efficient. Taxes came in many forms. There was the tributum soli, a land tax calculated on agricultural output. There was the tributum capitis, a head tax assessed on individuals regardless of income. There were customs duties on goods transported by land or sea. There were sales taxes, inheritance taxes, manumission fees, and extraordinary levies imposed during wartime or crisis. Each one chipped away at subsistence margins. In an agrarian economy where a bad harvest could mean starvation, tax demands did not adjust for misfortune. Rome expected its due whether the rains came or not. For peasants, survival depended on borrowing to meet tax obligations, but loans carried interest, miss a payment, and debt compounded quickly. Many farmers slipped into debt bondage, effectively surrendering their labor to creditors. Others fled their land altogether, becoming vagrants or attaching themselves to wealthy patrons for protection. Urban residents fared no better. Tradesmen and shopkeepers paid taxes on goods sold, on workshop space, even on basic transactions. Bakers, butchers, and millers were often bound by law to their profession, required to continue production regardless of profit. The state needed bread, and it would have it. Tax evasion was common and dangerous. False declarations could result in confiscation of all property. Informers were rewarded. Communities turned inward, suspicious of neighbors who might report them to authorities in exchange for a share of the penalty. The psychological toll was immense. Taxation was not a distant abstraction. It was a recurring threat that shaped daily decision-making. Should you plant more crops, knowing higher yields meant higher assessments? Should you improve your home, knowing visible prosperity invited scrutiny? In many cases, the rational choice was stagnation. By the 3rd and 4th centuries, the system hardened further. As military expenses soared and revenues shrank, the state tightened its grip. Occupations became hereditary. Peasants were legally bound to the land they worked, ancestors of medieval serfs. Tax liability followed bloodlines. You were born owing Rome, and you would die that way too. What makes this system especially lethal to a modern person is not just its harshness, but its totality. There was no concept of taxpayer rights, no presumption of innocence, no social safety net to catch those crushed by obligation. If taxes ruined you, that was not a failure of the system. It was proof that the system worked. Rome's tax structure reveals a state that understood power with terrifying clarity. Wealth flowed upward, risk flowed downward. Stability was purchased through pressure, not consent. The empire endured not because its subjects thrived, but because they endured just long enough. So if you were dropped into the Roman world without patrons, without local knowledge, without the instincts honed by generations of survival, you would face a system designed to exploit every weakness. Miss a payment, misjudge an assessment, trust the wrong official. Any one mistake could unravel your life. The Roman tax system did not ask whether you could survive it. It assumed you would adapt or disappear. And for countless people across centuries of Roman rule, disappearance was the only outcome Rome ever truly expected.